Get ready for 160 word per minute shorthand dictation. Start. The United Nations commemorated its 75th anniversary on September 21, 2020 by adopting a declaration. The anniversary comes at a time when the world is witnessing a retreat from multilateralism. It also faces an unprecedented pandemic. In his address to the UN on September 22, the UN Secretary General called the pandemic the fifth horseman. No one could have predicted it. It has also brought in its wake the deepest recession the world has seen the 1930s. This has made it more difficult to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals (SDGs) the UN had adopted. The Secretary General said the world is currently off track in achieving the SDGs. Challenge to multilateralism. The challenge to multilateralism is coming not from the have-nots but the main stakeholders of the system. The US is not alone in withdrawing from multilateralism. Brexit has shown that nationalism remains strong in Europe. It has delivered a blow to the idea of Europe united and whole. Nevertheless, the most important development is the position of the US. As French President Emmanuel Macron remarked in his speech at the UN General Assembly, the US, which created the international system as we know today, is no longer willing to be its guarantor of last resort. US President Donald Trump stressed America first in his speech and suggested that others too should put their countries first. China has stepped in to take advantage of the West's retreat from multilateralism, but China's assertion of a role on the world stage is not an embrace of the idea of multilateralism. Its flagship Belt and Road Initiative consists of a series of bilateral credit agreements with recipient countries with no mechanism for multilateral consultation or oversight. Curiously, President Xi Jinping's speech at the UN General Assembly did not mention it. The European Union's and US's sanctions against Russia have driven it closer to China. The rift between the permanent members of the Security Council has already started affecting the work of the UN Security Council. The speeches at the regular session of the UN General Assembly on September 22nd brought out the clashing perspectives of the US and China. President Trump highlighted China's culpability in the spread of the pandemic. He pointed out that China had banned internal flights but allowed international flights from Wuhan to continue. This set the stage for the spread of COVID-19. The World Health Organization also failed to provide early warnings. President Xi's speech sought to project the fight against COVID-19 as a matter of collective responsibility of the international community. He said China will honor its commitment to provide $2 million assistance to the developing countries over 2 years. This was clearly a reference to existing pledges without bringing additional resources to tackle a crisis which has tripped the world economy into recession. This is not a large amount considering the scale. The actual assistance committed to the UN COVID-19 response fund was a paltry $50 million in addition to a similar amount pledged earlier. President Macron pointed out that while the US is withdrawing, the world faces China's projection beyond its frontiers. He also highlighted problems nearer home posed by Turkey's intervention in Syria, Libya, and the Eastern Mediterranean, which is a breach of international law. The last was a reference to Turkey sending a drilling ship in Greek and Cypriot exclusive economic zones. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan made a detailed reference to the Jammu and Kashmir issue. Though otherwise Mr. Erdogan's statements may not matter, Turkey has assumed the position of UN General Assembly President. Several hurdles. The UN Secretary General's report on the work of the organization highlights some of the achievements and challenges the world body faces. Over 40 UN political missions and peacekeeping operations engage 95,000 troops, police, and civil personnel. To be effective, they have to be put on a sound financial basis. The UN peacekeeping budget, a little over $8 billion, is a small fraction of the $1.9 trillion military expenditure governments made in 2019. Yet it suffers from a paucity of resources. There was an outstanding assessed contribution of $1.7 billion for peacekeeping activities by the end of the financial year. Similarly, there was an outstanding $711 million in the assessed contribution for the general budget. Most of the humanitarian assistance developed developmental work and budgets of the specialized agencies are based on voluntary contributions. There are calls for increasing public-private partnerships. This is not a satisfactory arrangement. The UN provides public goods in terms of peace and development, often in remote parts of the world. There may not be enough appetite on the part of corporations. The UN remains an intergovernmental body. Most world leaders spoke of climate change. President Trump mentioned that China's emissions are nearly twice of those of the US, and despite its withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, the US has reduced its carbon emissions by more than any country in the world. President Xi said that after peaking emissions by 2030, China will achieve carbon neutrality before 2060. President Macron said that he was determined to see the EU agree on a target of achieving carbon neutrality by 2050. I first met Jaswant Singh in the days following India's nuclear tests on May 11 and 13, 1998. As the Ministry of External Affairs official dealing with nuclear issue, I was to draft Prime Minister A.B. Vajpayee's address to Parliament due to open on May 27 while handling the flood of communications with our embassies and outreach with Delhi-based embassies and media. Every few days, Mr. Vajpayee would convene a meeting to take stock of the international fallout, and Jaswant Singh, then Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission, was a permanent invitee. As the draft speech and the nuclear policy paper went back and forth, Mr. Vajpayee's trust and regard for him soon became evident. Jaswant Singh had spent under a decade in the Indian Army, but clearly had studied and thought deeply about India's security dilemmas and challenges. He also had a vision of 21st century India that Mr. Vajpayee shared. Hardly surprising then that the following month he was entrusted with the responsibility of opening dialogue with the United States, a daunting task because the Clinton administration had come down heavily on India taking the lead in the UN Security Council in drafting a highly critical resolution and imposing sanctions. The American negotiations. US President Bill Clinton had originally planned a visit to India in early 1998, postponed to late 1998 because of the elections that brought the Vajpayee government to power. The nuclear tests left the US administration stunned and embarrassed. Jaswant Singh was visited New York for a UN meeting in early June. A message was conveyed to the White House that he would be available to come to Washington for talks. While he was not foreign minister, he held cabinet rank as deputy chairman of the Planning Commission. U.S. Secretary of State Madeleine Albright was traveling, so it was appropriate that Deputy Secretary of State Rob Talbot, who would be acting secretary, could engage the visitor, and thus began the dialogue between India and the U.S., an engagement that is best described as the most intense, the most inconclusive, and yet the most productive. After 16 meetings between June 1998 and September 2000 in 7 cities, the tide turned with the highly successful Clinton visit in March 2000 and Mr. Vajpayee's return visit in September 2000 when Mr. Clinton hosted his largest state dinner at the White House. From estranged democracies, India and the US became neutral partners for the 21st century. I was privileged to be a part of the team and consider it a masterclass in diplomatic negotiations. The US position was guided by progress of 5 benchmarks for India that were also part of the UN Security Council resolution signed, the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty that had been concluded in 1996, joined the Fissile Material Cut-off Treaty negotiations being pushed in Geneva, accept a freeze on developing nuclear arsenal, tighten export controls on sensitive materials and technologies, and engage in dialogue to reduce tensions with Pakistan. Jaswant Singh took Mr. Vajpayee's speech and the nuclear policy paper tabled in Parliament as his reference frame. He elaborated on India's security concerns, elements of credible minimum deterrence as evident of India's restrained adoption of a no first use policy to ensure stability, voluntary declaration of a moratorium on further nuclear testing, and India's continuing commitment to responsible non-proliferation despite not being party to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons (NPT). While both agreed that neither was looking for shortcuts, Straub Talbot emphasized compliance with the benchmarks while Jaswant Singh focused on securing better appreciation of India's security compulsions that would compel and democratic government to do what India had. What Brent Jaswant was ramrod, straight battle rod wearing his trademark army style khaki bush shirt. Jaswant Singh's most distinctive feature was his resonant baritone that he used equally skillfully to make a short decisive point and close a discussion, or to spin long complex sentences to stymie an inquisitive journalist or leave his interlocutor pondering. Another hallmark was his resource to homespun aphorisms. In the early days of his dialogue with Straub Talbot, Jaswant cited an old saying, "There is merit in asking for directions only if we know the village we are going to." As Straub Talbot later acknowledged, Jaswant's strategy was more directional than destinational and laid the grounds for the lifting of sanctions, introducing the next steps in strategic partnership leading to the 2008 US India civilian nuclear deal. The China meet on another occasion in Melina in July 1998. We had our first meeting since the tests with the Chinese on the margins.